Hi, I'm Peter Chan, National Weather Service Program Lead of the Alaska Weather Show, and I have a very important change notice to share with you. The last TV broadcast of the Alaska Weather Show in the traditional sense over the airwaves will be on Saturday, June 30th. Starting on July 1st and thereafter, the National Weather Service will provide a modified web-based version of the program on a new YouTube channel. So that means you'll be able to find us. We'll be moving from at AKwx TV to at NWS Alaska, and you can go ahead and subscribe to that channel now. There will be a public comment period from May 15th through July 30th, so please send your comments or concerns to nws.service-change-comments@noaa.gov. And if you have any other questions, you may reach carrie.haisley at noaa.gov and donald.moore@noaa.gov. Thank you for your patience and understanding.
Hello again, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us for this Thursday's edition of Alaska Weather on this 18th day of May 2023. I'm meteorologist David Percy. Up first on the satellite imagery, not a lot out here over the Bering Sea. High pressure farther to the west here, clouds coming down from the northeast around that. A few areas of clouds into the Shimianatu area. A lot of lower clouds scattered across, or actually covering most of the Bering Sea here on up to St. Lawrence Island. Still some pretty chilly air coming down, keeping the snowfall levels near sea level from the Pribilofs right on down to the eastern Aleutians. And let's see, rolling this again. Moisture coming eastward here around a low farther to the south, kind of shearing off, some of it coming back down to the southeast, and then this kind of sliding up to the north, bringing variable clouds in over south central Alaska. Most of the moisture staying south of Kodiak Island, maybe just clipping Sitkinak there with maybe a little bit of light rain, but nothing significant. A few flurries clipping the eastern Arctic coastal areas, as well as a weak trough kind of scoots by there. And then a system here should kick the winds up along the western Arctic coast for tomorrow and maybe later tonight through tomorrow. Getting a little breezy there in that area. Otherwise, winds are going to be pretty light over the remainder of the state. Sunny, warm conditions for the southeast coast today. And some areas into the 80s, many areas into the 70s, and then coastal areas in the 60s. But even they were in the lower 70s earlier before a sea breeze kicked in. And again, pretty cloudy there for Kodiak Island. And more moisture here with the main front down in this area coming northeastward there. And that should make a pretty good jog up to the north as well later tonight and bring clouds and rain into the panhandle. But today, sunshine here. Let's see, AKwx topped out at 86 degrees early in the afternoon, then kind of fell back into the lower 80s there, a little more ocean air blowing in, but very nice conditions across all the panhandle today. Variable cloudiness here and over south central Alaska, but still temperatures and some sunshine, hazy sunshine in some areas, climbing into the well into the 60s, but most areas staying in the 50s. Nice up over the interior. Then there's that weak trough clipping the eastern Arctic coast there with a few flurries. Otherwise, still had some snow reported today, light snow over the Pribilofs, very light amounts. So same thing for the eastern Aleutian areas. Otherwise, the remainder of the Bering Sea dry and pretty light winds. And for tonight, winds will start to pick up as this low creeps northward, tightens the gradient a little bit here. So look for those north winds, possibly gusting 25 to maybe 35 miles an hour here for the Alaska Peninsula, a place like King Cove and maybe Falls Pass, Cold Bay, those areas. And the interior here staying dry all the way up to the Arctic coast, North Slope, just a few clouds around in areas. Front, again, bringing chance of rain, increasing chances of rain, call it that, for the Panhandle. May look a little more wet than it actually will be. But chances for precipitation also for Yakutat late tonight toward tomorrow morning. Definitely rain moving into Kodiak Island tonight and the Alaska Peninsula. But no change. South central Alaska, look for an increase in the clouds late tonight. And then for tomorrow, that whole mess shifts northward, bringing moisture into the Copper River Basin, mostly in the form of showers there. Could see some periods of light rain, areas of south central Alaska, especially along the south coast of the Kenai Peninsula, western Prince William Sound, the North Gulf Coast. Best chance for rain, north coast of the Panhandle and northern areas. Lesser chances down to the south and off to the east. Periods of rain, Kodiak Island with lighter winds. And the same thing for the Alaska Peninsula. Back to the west, nothing but high pressure out that way, keeping conditions pretty nice there. And then for Friday, no change. This low center comes up to just south of, let's see, Chignik there. So southeast winds will get a little brisk there for Sitkinak and even Kodiak Island with periods of rain throughout the entire day. So it looks kind of wet and windy for the first day of the weekend, not only for Kodiak Island, but the Alaska Peninsula, pretty showery for the eastern Aleutians, and mostly cloudy, cooler, and showers scattered across just about all of southern Alaska here, and more showery for the Panhandle, those ending down to the south, though, in the afternoon. North of the Alaska Range, though, maybe variably to mostly cloudy, becoming mostly clear there for the northern valley, Seward Peninsula, St. Lawrence Island. And look for some clouds, but light variable winds for the Arctic coast. Lows tonight in the 50s for the Panhandle, 40s everywhere else. And for the highs tomorrow, well into the 60s here, inland areas of southern Alaska. And a little cooler now with that moisture coming in, so or considerably cooler. In fact, some areas down 20 degrees from what you had today for the southeast coast. And lows upper 45 to 50 for the Panhandle, in the 40s otherwise. Highs 50s and 60s, upper 50s to lower 60s for the southeast coast. Up to the north, lows tonight, mid and upper Tanana Valley in the 40s. And north there, 20s back to the west, all the way up to the Arctic coast. Highs tomorrow, mid to upper 70s, upper Tanana Valley, 40-mile country. Cooler back out here to the west and to the north. And then the lows right around lower 50s for Fairbanks area. 20s for the North Slope and Arctic coast, Bering Strait. Highs 70 to 75 or 6 or 7 there for the central and eastern part of the state. Near freezing for the Arctic coast. Southwest coast tonight, upper 20s for the Pribilofs and 30s everywhere else, followed by highs, upper 30s for the Pribilofs and 40s, lower 50s, southwest coast, lower 40s for the Aleutians, mid to upper 40s for the Alaska Peninsula, and lows in the 30s, followed by highs in the 40s.
Good afternoon. I'm Bob Busey, a hydrologist with the Alaska Pacific River Forecast Center, and I'm here to bring you the Alaska 2023 Spring Breakup Outlook. We hope you are all staying safe. As I'm sure everyone watching realizes, there have been a number of serious floods over many of the communities up and down the Yukon and Kuskokwim. Our thoughts are with all of you, and we hope that things are healing. And as a reminder, it's always a good idea to be flood ready. What does that mean at this point? Well, I'm sure you're all prepared, but it's not too late to start. You should have an emergency plan that includes your family, your friends, and your pets, and you should have an emergency package of some sort that includes local foods from your pantry, any prescription medicines, maybe a first aid kit. It's also a good idea to move your vehicles to higher ground. So if you have any trucks, quads, anything like that, four-wheelers, ATVs, until the flood threat is gone, try to move them to higher ground if you're able. So we're about most of the way through breakup, but I just wanted to highlight a key piece is the snowpack going into breakup, the ice thickness at the moment and the strength of it, as well as what the spring weather patterns have been. We're going to touch base on those briefly here in the next slide or two. This is what the snowpack was for 2023. This is April 1st, and for the most part, we're like average, normal. These blues show like a little bit of average, 1 to 1.5 times. Fast forward till last week, this is what our snowpack looked like. We do experience quite a bit of melting, and for much of the low-lying parts of the state, we had 0 to 15% snow water equivalent compared to what we were April 1st. However, most of the mountains, quite a bit of snow. Most of the North Slope, quite a bit of snow. Let's fast forward to yesterday. an impressive amount of melting since as we've reached further into May. Basically now it's just the North Slope and Seward Peninsula and the Brooks Range, plus a bunch of mountains in the Alaska Range and further south. Everywhere else is just a minimal amount of snow. Well, if the snow is gone, that means it's now in the river. So be careful out there, and don't forget to think twice on ice. This is our the next 2 days outlook for floods, and I want to highlight that we do have some real concerns over this week. The next 2 days we're anticipating some good flood potential for upriver of Bethel and the Calskag and down to Luxac and on down to the lower reaches of the Kuskokwim, as well as the Buckland area is seeing some active flooding as of today, Thursday. So be careful and be safe and move your vehicles to higher ground if possible. Another couple areas I want to highlight is there's an ice dam above Ruby, and there's still intact ice in the Bishop Rock area of below Galena. That all has the potential for forming ice dams, and ice jams are pretty unpredictable, so just be aware and be on high alert. The next phase of water over the next week or so is going to be the upper Yukon and Porcupine, where a big pulse of snowmelt from Canada is coming down. So this is our current river status. We're kind of moved to mostly open, which is a big change from last week aside from the North Slope. And mostly open means not a lot of ice in the channel. Mostly it's just pretty much river, ice on the banks. I also want to highlight there's a number of communities here with flood watches and warnings, and I would direct you to our webpage, weather.gov/APRFC, and you can get tuned in on all of our watches and advisories that are active. So, spring breakup outlook, pretty much we're going according to our forecast here. This is the averages for the last historical record, and these dates are pretty much like all falling into the past now in the eastern interior, eastern part of the state, and the present for the western part of the state. North Slope is still very soon, the near present. We are still seeing western Alaska is going 8 to 11 days late. I'll hop over, this is our actual breakup dates. On the Yukon, it's ranged from 4 to 8 days, and we had Ruby go out yesterday, and we're anticipating Galena the next day or two, and by the time we've talked next week, probably on further down towards Caltag and Holy Cross. This is the Kuskokwim, and Nikolai was the first big break on the Kuskokwim last week, and that went out 9 days, and we're holding to the 9 to 11. So 2 days ago, Calskag went out, upper and lower, and there's an ice jam down below there, and so we're waiting on Tuluxac, and probably the rest of the Kuskokwim hopefully will go quietly because there's now a lot of rotten ice in that neck of the woods. Temperature is about normal. Basically, you can see the pie chart. There isn't a lot of weight. Slightly cooler in the Bethel area, slightly warmer in the eastern Alaska. This is more specifically, this is Bethel, and you can see mostly temperatures are above freezing at this point. Any snow is pretty much becoming no snow. And we look at the hydrograph, all that no snow is turning into a big stage on the Kuskokwim. This is Crooked Creek, and there's a lot of water. We're at action stage there. If we go back and look at the mouth of Bethel, not a lot of water. There's a lot of water, but there's no breakup yet. So there's going to be even more on top of this once the breakup front arrives. This is the Kotzebue area, Kotzebue Airport, and I wanted to take a look at the Kobuk, noaa, what might it be going on there. Basically, it's still staying cool. Eastern, if you look on the Kayakuk around Bettles, it's been hot there, and there's a lot of snow that's melted, and you kind of saw that in the snow map. But if you're looking at the Kobuk area, not a lot of melting. Looking at the Kayakuk at Hughes, quite a bit of melting. Hopping over to Canada, this is Dawson, and the snowmelt peak came quite shortly after the breakup ice front passed, but it's pretty much stayed at that level over the last several days, and we're anticipating that this water is going to be hitting Fort Yukon over the next few days. Some other water that's going to be reaching Fort Yukon is this big pulse coming from the Porcupine, and they are also at action level, and anticipating this is going to move down the river and end up at Fort Yukon and into the Yukon proper. So there's a lot of water. This is what mostly broken up looks like. This is at Sleep Mute. Nice quiet now after all that all the ice that just used to be. This is from our Riverwatch team, the next few photos. This is the below Kalskag. This is the ice jam. And then if we go a little further down, this is intact ice just above Tiluksak. On the Yukon, this is Tanana after the ice has gone out. You can still quite a bit of ice in the channel and quite a bit of ice on the banks. Meanwhile, down below Galena, this is at Bishop Rock, and this is some intact ice, still rotten looking, so we hope it goes gently. A little further south, this is from yesterday. This is near Nulato in Kayakuk, and you can see a big pan behind me and a bunch of broken up ice. So anyway, thanks for watching. Thanks for contributing on all of our community phone calls. Thanks for reaching out to us through our webpage and email, uploading pictures, calling us. But we're always happy for more. Feel free to share and feel free to visit our webpage, weather.gov/APRFC, or hit us up on social media. Thanks.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
IFR Friday morning here from the southwest Bering Sea, right on up through the Bering Strait and along the western central Arctic coast. And IFR just south of the Alaska Peninsula, up the east side of Kodiak Island, and taking a turn off to the east, sliding into the central and south coast of the Panhandle. Otherwise, marginal VFR tomorrow morning for the southeast coast, North Gulf Coast, interior Alaska, all the way up to the eastern Arctic coast, good VFR. And then we'll see for tomorrow afternoon. IFR here comes out of nowhere and comes all the way down to the Alaska Peninsula and eastern Aleutians, and also slides on up toward Dillingham, back to the Pribilofs, and then down over the western Aleutians. Kind of breaks here with some VFR popping up over the Bering Strait area, and then this area pulling back off the coast. So good VFR, all of interior Alaska. Clouds thickening and starting to lower here for the Cook Inlet, Kenai Peninsula area, with IFR showing up south coast of the Kenai Peninsula and along the North Gulf Coast, and then down along the north coast of the Panhandle. Otherwise, pretty good staying VFR for Cook Inlet and the Susitna Valley, marginal VFR in the Manuska Valley, mostly VFR for the Copper River Basin areas. And moving on to Saturday morning, still possibly marginal VFR on the eastern slopes of the western Alaska Range. Otherwise, Cook Inlet and the Manuska and Susitna Valleys, mostly VFR, Copper River Basin VFR, Prince William Sound marginal, IFR, mostly staying off the coastline here of Kodiak Island and the Kenai Peninsula, marginal VFR for the southeast coast, and then some IFR here, Yukon Delta, out toward the Pribilofs, down to the eastern Aleutians, and that narrow band of IFR returns to the Bering Strait here from about Gamble up to Tin City, and covering the western Arctic coast to the central Arctic coast as well. And then for the afternoon, IFR along all of the Arctic coast, right along the coast, not inland at all. VFR for the southern North Slope through the Brooks Range, all the way down to the Alaska Range. And then again, possible lower conditions with that southeast flow pulling moisture up to the North Gulf Coast and to a lesser extent into the Cook Inlet area. So some lower conditions there, marginal for the Panhandle, solid VFR for the interior, marginal for Norton Sound, and right along the Yukon Delta coast, Kuskokwim Delta coast, VFR off the coastline, as you can see, into Bristol Bay. A couple areas of IFR out here over the, let's see, southern Bering Sea and the Aleutians. Anatuvik, VFR. Adigan, same forecast, VFR. For Friday, Lake Clark and Merrill, possible marginal VFR, especially on the eastern entrances of both passes. Rainy, VFR. And for windy, looking good there as well, VFR. Isabel, VFR. And Mintesta, VFR. But Tanita, go for marginal VFR, especially on the east side here. May stay VFR in the western entrance. And for Portage, marginal VFR and Chilkoot and White, occasional IFR becoming less in the afternoon for those two passes. Freezing levels tomorrow, 10,000 feet in the Panhandle, now expanding westward here, covering south central Alaska. And 4 to 8,000 feet here over the western and southwest interior. Still cool air aloft out over the Bering Sea, eastern Bering Pribilofs down to the Aleutians. Icing with that moisture coming north and northwestward. Got increasing threats of isolated moderate rime icing, eastern Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula, on up into Bristol Bay, Kodiak Island, Kenai Peninsula area, Prince William Sound, and a narrow band possibly over the northern panhandle. And for the jet stream, upper level high pressure at 32,000 feet over the interior there. And southeast becomes more east-southeast, 70 to 85 knots, coming across Bristol Bay. And then westerlies on the north side of that ridge axis there at about 60 knots. 9,000 feet, light winds, central northern interior, increasing here, 45 to 50 knots across southern southwest Alaska, north 40 there toward the eastern Aleutians. 3,000 feet, southeast winds up to 40 knots right into Prince William Sound, 45 knot easterlies there across northeast Bristol Bay, and then north-northeast, 40 to 45 knots for the eastern Aleutians, and then westerlies at about 35 knots, western Arctic coast. And so we'll look for some isolated moderate turbulence up there in Kodiak Island, Bristol Bay, Prince William Sound, and the eastern Aleutians.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back now for our marine weather segment. We start with the sea ice. The ice continues to melt off here across the northern Bering Sea and along the west coast. We have many areas of water opening up, and this is still about a week or two behind schedule because of such a cold spring, but the ice also, we see polynyas and areas opening up along the northwestern coast, especially from around Point Lay, Point Hope on up to off there west of Wainwright. And this trend will just continue as we have the high sun angle and temperatures gradually moderating here as we approach the summer solstice. Across the southeast panhandle, winds will be out of the southeast on Friday, 10 to 15 knots. Inner channels, waves generally 2-3 feet. Outer channels, we're seeing winds that are going to be out of the southeast around 20-25 knots. We have a frontal system pushing up after a very warm week. Cooler temperatures with cloud cover, scattered showers. A little breezier conditions setting up here for Friday and over the weekend. By Saturday, winds across the inner channels will come down a little bit around out of the southeast at about 10 knots with waves running a couple of feet. The outer coast within 15 nautical miles of shore, we are looking for winds of 10 to 15 knots, waves generally running 5 or 6 feet. For the northwestern Gulf, winds will be easterly off of the Kenai at 30 knots. Also there at the entrance of Cook Inlet, 30 knot winds, waves 6 to 8 feet. East winds 30 knots there at Prince William Sound, and look for northeast to north winds through the upper and middle portion of Cook Inlet at 25 knots and waves about 5 feet. Come Saturday, winds will be easterly there and come down to 10 knots in Prince William Sound with 2-foot waves. Easterly winds here at the entrance of Cook Inlet at 25 knots with waves around 5 feet or so, but as much as 8 to 9 feet off of the Kenai there. And then across the Kodiak Island on Friday, winds will be out of the east-northeast, 25 to 30 knots there within Shelikof Strait. And areas down along the Alaska Peninsula are going to have a tendency to see winds more out of the north to northwest at 20 to 25 knots. On Saturday, low pressure is going to be approaching from the North Pacific and be just near and south of Sand Point, so we expect easterly winds to 30 knots across Kodiak Island, 30 to even 35 knot winds across the middle upper portion of the peninsula, especially on the Pacific side, and waves are going to be running as high as 12 to 14 feet. Once you get for a little further offshore across Cook Inlet, or from Bristol Bay down toward north of Cold Bay, winds east-northeast 30 knots, waves 7 to 9 feet. The Aleutians will generally have northwesterly winds coming up here through Friday, as high as 25-30 knots across the eastern Aleutians, falling back off to about 15 to 20 knots central and western Aleutians. Waves North Pacific side 4 to 6 feet, and generally 4 to 7 feet on the Bering side, though as high as 10 feet north of Dutch Harbor. And on Saturday, Winds across much of the region will generally be north-northwest at 15 to 20 knots. Waves 3 to 5 feet on the North Pacific side and 5 to 7 feet on the Bering side. Along the southwest coast and areas south of St. Lawrence Island, north winds to 25 knots, waves 5 feet St. Matthew, 8 feet vicinity of St. Paul and St. George, north winds within Norton Sound there with waves running 4 feet. On Saturday, winds are going to try to turn a little more offshore, northeast to east off the southwest mainland. 15 to 20 knots, waves running 3 feet there within Norton Sound, 3 feet off the lower Yukon Delta, 2 feet there within Kuskokwim Bay, and maybe as much as 3-4 feet there in Bristol Bay. And across the far north, winds on Friday will generally have a southerly component along the Arctic coast at 10 to 20 knots, though once you get west of Utqiagvik, winds will be more southwest to south, 20-25 knots, and then as you get down here through the lower Bering Sea, south winds to 15 knots, but they turn around to the north through the Bering Strait there across the north side of St. Lawrence and Norton Sound as high as 25 knots there within Norton Sound. And then for Saturday, winds will be east or westerly at 15 knots, Utqiagvik on over toward Kaktovik, and generally north winds through the lower Chukchi Sea and Bering Strait, 15 to 20 knots to the north side of St. Lawrence. Northeasterly winds out of Norton Sound at 20 knots. Waves here in areas south of the Bering Strait generally running about 3 to 4 feet. So Friday afternoon, here's that low that's going to be coming up on the North Pacific, pulling back toward the areas of the peninsula by Saturday afternoon and evening with some breezier conditions around Kodiak Island, perhaps lower gale force winds.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.